Isn't it ironic? In 2020, the United Kingdom left the European Union. One of the central motives? To finally limit migration.
How much would immigration fall by if Brexit were to happen?
Well, the thing we'd be able to do is get the figures under control.
Well, that didn't quite work out. Net migration to the UK hit a record level of 900,000 in 2023. The United States have made the same experience. Since the 80s, they tried to limit migration from Latin America. However, the number of people born in Latin America that are living in the US went from 1.8 million in the 70s to over 23 million today. Both the US and Europe observe the same paradox. Stricter rules on migration lead to more migration. In this video, we will look at the 4 reasons why. The waterbed effect. In March 2016, the EU signed a deal with Turkey. It basically said that Turkey would take back every illegal immigrant that reached Greek islands through Turkey. It was a reaction to the migration crisis that overwhelmed the EU a year earlier in 2015. And on first glance, this deal worked perfectly fine for the EU. Migrants trying to enter the European Union usually had 3 main routes. They all go through the Mediterranean Sea. The already mentioned eastern route from Turkey through Greece, the central route through Italy, and the western route through the Strait of Gibraltar to Spain. In 2015, the eastern route was by far the most popular, with almost 900,000 crossings. The central route was taken by about 150,000 immigrants, and only 7,000 took the western route through Spain. In 2016, thanks to the deal with Turkey, the eastern route dried out significantly, from almost 900,000 to less than 200,000 crossings. But, at the same time, both the central and the western route gained in popularity. So partially, the arrival of migrants shifted from Greece to Spain and Italy. And sure, it doesn't seem like a lot in this first year, but over the next years, especially the western route gained in popularity. This is the waterbed effect at work. Just like with a real waterbed, if you push it down on one side, it will simply rise on the other side. If you close the eastern route, migrants will just go through other corridors. Or, as the International Organization for Migration puts it, building fences does not stop the refugee influx. It merely shifts it to other countries. Now, to some extent you can disagree with this notion. As we see with the example of the Turkey deal, the total number of migrants went down. So it's not like all migrants just shifted to Italy and Spain. But still, the waterbed effect comes into action every time a country tries to limit the inflow of migrants. Stricter border enforcement in the Mediterranean Sea led many migrants to seek an entirely new way into the EU. They abandoned the Mediterranean Sea altogether and set their eyes on the Atlantic Ocean. Because some 100 kilometers off the African coast, there are the Canary Islands that belong to Spain, and they are therefore also a part of the European Union. In the beginning of this year, the Western African route to the Canary Islands became the most used way of entering the EU for migrants. And as you can imagine, with such a long distance through the Atlantic Ocean, this route is far more deadly than the already dangerous Mediterranean. A similar dynamic can be observed at the American border with Mexico. Stricter border enforcement does indeed reduce the total number of migrants, but more often than not, migrants will just take more dangerous and deadly routes through the desert. Still, you could argue that higher fences do reduce the flow of migrants after all. But there is a second mechanism that no fence or wall, no matter how high, can prevent. Moving into illegality. Because the most common way of illegally migrating to another country regularly gets overlooked in the public debate. It's people that overstay their visa. These immigrants originally entered the country legally, on a student, tourist or work visa, and then just stayed longer than their visa would actually allow. No wall in the world can stop this form of illegal migration. Both in the EU and the United States, visa overstayers are the main source of illegal migration. And of course, the harder you make it to migrate to a country, the more people will be inclined to overstay their visa. A vivid example of this move into illegality can be seen in the United Kingdom. In 2016, the country voted to leave the European Union. Many Brexiteers wanted a stricter migration policy. But for many people outside the UK, the country remained to be an attractive destination. And therefore, the number of tourists and workers overstaying their visa grew and grew. In 2017, about 50,000 migrants did not return after their visa expired. Just 3 years later, in 2020, this number almost doubled to over 90,000. Unfortunately, the British government stopped publishing those numbers after 2020. And so it's time to look at the third mechanism. Now or never. For this, let's observe 3 countries in South America in the 1960s: Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana. Guyana was a British colony, Suriname a Dutch colony, and French Guyana a French colony. The people living in all these countries could easily migrate to their mother countries. That is until 1962. That year, Great Britain passed the Commonwealth Act, which sought to limit migration from their colonies, including Guyana. This information led many Guyanese to panic. They feared that suddenly the door to the United Kingdom might close for good. Better to pack your bag and head for the UK as soon as possible. Understandably, what followed was a mass exodus from Guyana. In the 1960s, thousands of Guyanese left their country. Nowadays, an estimated 56% of people born in Guyana live outside their home country. Some years later, a similar dynamic could be observed in Suriname. In 1975, Suriname was granted independence from the Netherlands. Officially, the Dutch government portrayed this as an act of overcoming its colonial history. In reality, they just wanted fewer migrants from Suriname. And just like in Guyana, many Surinamese who played with the thought of moving to the Netherlands suddenly pushed this effort, as they feared that independence might come with migration restrictions. Tens of thousands of Surinamese left their country. In 1975, about 10% of the total population emigrated in this 1 year. Just like with Guyana, 56% of the Surinamese population now live outside their home country, most of them in the Netherlands. But now, let's look at the example of French Guyana. Up until this day, it remains to be a part of France, which is why the French Guyanese can still freely travel in and out of France. Therefore, no emigration hysteria ever broke out here. The number of French Guyanese living abroad remained to be below 5%. So you see, for the people of French Guyana, the door to France is wide open. And because of that, they don't go through it and stay in their home country. And whenever Western countries try to close their doors for migrants, that is precisely the moment when migration really spikes. Which leads us to the last mechanism, the caging effect. Without migration restrictions, borders are often like revolving doors. Before 1986, Mexicans could relatively easily move in and out of the US. When the US economy was booming and had high labor demand, Mexicans moved to the US to work there. When the US economy was cooling off, the Mexicans moved back home. But in 1986, the US passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act. It basically had 2 objectives. First, offer those Mexicans that were already in the US a path to citizenship. But second, make sure that no new Mexican immigrants are coming. For that, the government increased spending on border security. From that point on, the border between Mexico and the US was no longer a revolving door. Gone were the times in which Mexicans could move in and, very importantly, out of the US, depending on the economic circumstances. From now on, as a Mexican, you would have to decide. Do I want to stay at home in Mexico for the rest of my life? Or do I try my luck migrating northwards and stay there forever? The consequence can be seen in this chart. Many Mexicans did indeed try their luck. Since the 80s, the number of Mexicans living in the US exploded, from around 2.2 million to over 10 million in recent years. So the harder you make it to enter a country, the more you encourage people to try to permanently stay in your country. And that is the central problem that many politicians overlook, as they are too focused on the number of people entering the country and don't look at net migration, which is also influenced by the number of people moving back to their home country.